We're back. Theology by the book. We're at a different time, different book, a little bit different format. We're going to try to keep this to 15, 20 minutes. That means I can't keep talking right now. But let me just say this. This is, we're going through the book this time, and it's in the public domain, so we can read every word if we wanted to. Thoughts for Young Men by J.C. Ryle. There's different, you've got did Canon Press put that one out, or is that, they
Yeah,
do a
no, it's a Christian Heritage
Christian
series
Heritage Series?
but it is Canon Press published. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, they do a good job with their covers. But yeah. So anyway, so we're going through this by J.C. Ryle. He's an Anglican priest from the 1800s, early 1800s. And let's see, our friend Dr. Beakey has a quote that I put down in my phone about him. He said he was called the greatest champion of evangelical truth in the Victorian church. And so a lot of people have benefited greatly from this book. And I think, we're living in a time when we do need to call our young men to the faith and to work in the church and the world. So if you're listening to this later, so this is primarily for a church, but anybody that wants to listen to this, they certainly can and participate. I'm John Black, pastor at Second Street Presbyterian Church. Wes Mabry, he's a member at Second Street Presbyterian Church. And he has the time and the inclination to do this. So if you would like to come on with us, a couple things I'll give you the link and you can come on with the video, or you can come on with just sound, or you can come on where you have neither video or sound, but but it's actually live. So if you comment with your keyboard, then we get it live rather than the 20-second delay or something like that. So if you'd like to participate, let me know and we'll allow it. Anything you want to say before we
I
get
thought
started?
Ryle was a little later on than that, but it seems he did die in 1900 to the
He died in
1900s.
1900.
Yeah, he did. So 18
Probably the cover makes him look more.
he was 1816 to 1900. There you have it.
Okay.
Tough time to be alive.
Aren't
Yeah.
they all? So I'm just going to start with it has a small introduction called Reasons for Exhorting Young Men. And he says, when the Apostle Paul wrote his epistle to Titus about his responsibility as a minister, he mentioned young men as a group requiring particular attention. After speaking of older men and older women and young women, he adds this advice from Titus chapter 2, verse 6. Encourage the young men to be self-controlled. And then he says, I'm going to follow the apostles' advice. I propose to offer a few words of friendly exhortation to young men. I am growing old myself, but there are few things that I can remember so well as were the days of my youth. I have a most distinct recollection of the joys and the sorrows, the hopes and the fears, the temptations and the difficulties, the mistaken judgments and the misplaced affections, the errors and the aspirations which surround and accompany a young man's life. If I can only say something to keep some young man walking in the right way and preserve him from faults and sins which may hurt his prospects both for time and eternity, I shall be very thankful. There are four things which I propose to do. And one, I'll mention some general reasons why young men need exhorting, which is what we'll start looking at today. Two, I will note some special dangers which young men need to be warned about. Three, I will give some general counsel which I beg young men to receive. Four, I will set down some special rules of conduct which I strongly advise young men to follow. On each of these 4 points, I have something to say, and I pray to God that what I say may do good to some soul. Then he gets into now the reasons for exhorting young men. I'm just going to read this first part, and not word for word, but just some things I've highlighted. What are the general reasons why young men need specific exhortation? I will mention several of them in order. One, For one thing, there is the painful fact that there are few young men anywhere who seem to be Christians. And I'll just stop there a second, and he goes on to elaborate it. But he's writing in the what we end up deciding the 1800s, mid 1800s, maybe later 1800s here, since he's older, he says. And there's a painful fact: there seem to be few young men anywhere who seem to be Christians. What do you think? Is that surely today there are young men everywhere who seem to be Christians?
Yeah, no, I think it rings true today, very similarly. Like, so even it's probably
Mm.
geographically, you may get people to self-identify as Christians more than other localities. However, I would say it still holds pretty true that it's tough to find young Christ-following Christians that are actually in the Word Lord's Day worship every week. I would still say it's
Yeah, I
not
agree. In the
commonplace.
general
Yeah.
population, no, right. So, and then he says, he kind of goes through, he says, I speak without respect of persons. I say it of all, rich or poor,
Mhm.
gentle or rough, educated or uneducated, in the city or in the country. It makes no difference. I shudder to think how few young men are led by the Spirit, how few are on that narrow road which leads to life, how few are setting their affections on things above, how few are taking up the cross and following Christ. I say all this with sorrow, but I believe in God's sight that I'm saying nothing more than the truth. Young men, you form a large and most important class in the population of this country. But where and in what condition are your souls? And then he talks about asking faithful ministers, and they'll tell you that men in the church, young men, seem to be most difficult. But I wanted to bring this up as I was looking at it. He says you form a large and most important class. So I think today one of our problems in our society may be thinking of young men as an important class. How dare you? And they tell me if I'm making too much of this, but how dare you speak of young men as a class?
Right.
Why are we setting them apart? Unless it's negatively. Because we have to have women need to be. Everything is equitable. Everything has to be the same. No difference between men and women. Too much. Um, so you said right. So I'm
Yeah,
assuming
take
you
it,
agree
take it,
with
take
what
it
I'm
back,
saying
seat
there.
boys. You've had your time. You know.
Yeah, I agree, and it does seem to be. You have to. We need to. Everyone needs encouraging in their own ways, but this is particularly for encouraging of young men. And then he says, in the population of this country, which would have been England. But it made me think, okay, we can't even talk like that. Is this guy a
Mhm.
nationalist? What's his deal? And so I wrote this down. I said, he points out this country, and it's just a normal way of talking, as we would talk about in our home or in our town. But when you start to say in our country, all of a sudden we have this thing now where it's like, you're talking nationalism. Like, we shouldn't talk about our country as opposed to, just talk about the world. But it used to be, I know in the 50s in particular, that there was a huge thing about, serving your country. Ask not, was it John F. Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And so I think somehow it just made me think about this whole Christian nationalism thing, how it used to just be a normal way of talking. Why do you need to call it nationalism? Just call it, we live in this country. We have an obligation to our country, and there's things that we can do in the world, but serve your country. There are things that are necessary. What do you think of that? Are they calling it nationalism now just to try to do some kind of psyop on us here?
Probably. I mean, I think there are the people that would like to see boundaries not exist, although God set boundaries. And there's plenty of people for probably nefarious reasons that would like to see them disappear. Um, but I think all of it probably does come back to the nuclear family, right? It's always
Mm.
upstream is the family. So if they can disintegrate that, and you may know this, but when did humanism start taking root? It would have been later on in the 1900s, right? Would have been the 40s or the 50s. It would have been post J.C. Ryle, correct?
Well, how are you defining your humanism? You mean as what do you mean by humanism then?
I would say very simply, and simply saying human autonomy. Okay,
As opposed to
correct.
God?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think Schaeffer wrote a book. He wrote a book about that. I can't think of what it's called, but it was an answer to after World War. Like I think the idea before World War II was there was progression in human nature to perfectionism. Like we are evolving to a higher and higher standard. But after World War II, and they saw the atrocities, then they sort of began to realize that that's not necessarily the case. But then, so that the idea was um, you need to make efforts. There's a guide, there's morality, and the world is not necessarily going to aspire to perfection. That there's great sin in the world, so don't be quite. So, oh, the Humanist Manifesto. That's what I'm thinking about. And in reaction, Schaeffer wrote the Christian Manifesto. I think part 1 and 2. But he just talks about humans are born sinful and they need a savior. And so I think if that's what you're talking about with humanism and human nature being what it is, I think it's devolved into not the perfect. Just anything you do is okay now. It's an amoral.
Right.
The only immoral thing is to say there's morality.
I bring that up because it's a lot of Ryle's exhortations here in this first part. Um, I do believe hold very true today, but he's making a lot of these exhortations prior to a lot of the stuff we're dealing with now that he maybe was not, which is it's
I
kind of
see.
interesting, and maybe we can connect some dots as we get into this. But
Well, the other thing I wanted to mention on the next page of mine, he talks about because he says, pastors. You ask pastors about who gives them the hardest time in the church, who's least likely to show up for different things as young men. Then in next paragraph in there, he says, ask parents, and they'll say who in their families gives them the most pain and trouble. Then he says, ask the judges and the police officers. He says who goes to the nightclubs and bars the most, who makes up the street gangs, who are the most often arrested for drunkenness, disturbing peace, fighting, stealing, assaults, and the like, who fill the jails, and he says, is it not these young men? But one thing, though, I think the women have called up some since then on this. Like um, the young women have come under a lot of assault and attack by Satan in the world. I think, the impression I have from Ryle's image he gives of his world is there are lots of good men, obviously, but there's lots of young men, hooligans. They're not listening to church. But the the young women tend to be more proper and moral and complacent,
yeah,
maybe. But today there's an assault on young women, as well. So that, and it may be that, what do you think of this? That part of that problem is because young men aren't stepping up and doing what they're supposed to do. That they have,
100%. But I think feminism can also explain a lot of this as well, because
mm,
pretty much society has placed our young girls in the same pool as our young boys. So they probably are doing a lot of the same things. Now, I did, just for giggles, I try to look up some of our statistics today of violent crimes committed by what
mm.
populace. And what's interesting, what I did find was most violent crimes are still committed by 16 to 23-year-olds, but it does not specify male or female. So,
Oh, so you have
yeah,
trouble finding that
yeah.
stat? Okay. Well, let's we did just a minute more. Let me delve into this one real quick. This is just number 2 says, death and judgment are waiting for young men, even as it waits for others, and they nearly all seem to forget it.
Mhm.
And so we can talk about this more next time. But yeah, I think he says, life is short, time is short. Um, it's never convenient to think about these things that you just, when you're young, you think you have all the time in the world. And but time is short. Nobody is guaranteed tomorrow, regardless of your age. So if you look up statistics on the ages at which people die, I mean, it's some people live to be in their 90s, but that's not typical. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into this book a little more. I think if people want to get it and read along, so we can start at number 2 here in chapter 1. Death and judgment are waiting for young men, even as it waits for others. And they nearly all seem to forget it. I mean, that sounds kind of self-explanatory, actually. Number 3 is what young men will be in all probability depends on what they are now, and they seem to forget this. Okay.
Oh, it's good. It's good.
Yeah.
He's got some good quotes in here, though.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's our time. I'm telling you, man, it's when you're the one talking, it goes quick. When you're the one listening, it's like this thing's lasting forever. So, but we'll do that. Hopefully, some people can grab some
Yeah.
books and maybe come on with us and have some observations, and we can continue to talk about it and stuff. But
Yeah.
thank you
Thank you.
very much. We do this at 12:15. So we had this little habit of doing. So let's go start over again. Text out of context. Genesis 12:15 is, and when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. See, he needed this book. I don't know what's going on there, but there we are.
Well,
All right,
sweet.
Wes.
Yeah.
Well, thank
Thank
you,
you.
sir. See you
Yep.
tonight. All right,
Sounds
looking
good.
forward to
See
it.
ya.